Welcome everyone to Enigma's Analysis. I'm your host, Mr. Enigma, and today we've got the division with the oldest rivalry in football, the always heated and intense NFC North, which is fitting because these teams cover a geographic area where it's so cold there's nothing else to do other than watch football. If I don't see a bunch of big dudes tackling each other soon, I'm going to set this whole town on fire, which will be so much warmer. Let's start with the Bears. Now, to understand the state of the current Chicago Bears is to hear the story of one Mitchell Trubisky. You see, a few years ago, the Chicago Bears had the 3rd overall draft pick. Well, not only did they pass up a chance to get, Patrick Mahomes or maybe Deshaun Watson as their franchise quarterback, they instead went after Mitch Trubisky, a quarterback who no other team with a high draft pick was strongly considering. And not only that, they traded up with the San Francisco 49ers to get him, which means that either someone on the 49ers is a hell of a manipulator or that Bears general manager Ryan Pace is extremely gullible. Honey, an Arabian prince has 6 figures waiting for me, and all I gotta do is give him my social security number. No, honey, listen, I canceled the doctor's appointment. I met this wizard disguised as a homeless man, and he sold me these magic beans. So, little bird told me you've got your eyes on some wet paper towel that plays quarterback.
Yeah, our scouts think he's going to be the next John Elway.
I'll give you next year's first round pick for him. And the one after that. And throw in a second.
You drive a hard bargain, but okay.
Yes, this is going to be our franchise quarterback forever. Haha, sucker, your loss. In any case, it's 2020. Mitch Trubisky is clearly a bust, and the Bears' offense is completely handcuffed by how crappy he's been. For this year, they brought in Nick Foles from the Jacksonville Jaguars, who is his own can of worms, to say the least. See, on the one hand, Nick Foles is a former Super Bowl MVP and was absolutely electric in getting the Eagles through the playoffs and to a Super Bowl win. Problem with Foles always is that on any team that's not based in Philadelphia, he's been lousy. However, he does have familiarity with Coach Matt Nagy, and honestly, you gotta try something if you're the Bears. So even though they haven't officially stated that Foles is starting in place of Mitch Trubisky, you gotta figure it's worth rolling the dice instead of just sticking with what you know you're gonna get out of Mitch, which is nowhere fast. You wouldn't know with their quarterback situation, but the Bears receiving core actually is pretty good. You got Allen Robinson as your number 1 wide receiver. Now all you need is someone who can get him the ball consistently instead of throwing it 20 feet above his head. The running back situation is complexing though, because they were really lousy running the ball, even with the fact that Mitch Trubisky's one saving grace is that he can run the ball. I still never really understood why they phased Jordan Howard out a few years ago when their running game was really potent. I guess they figured that the combo of Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery was the way to go moving forward, but they didn't really stick to that, or at least they didn't do a good job of it. Similarly confusing is their tight end situation. They overpaid considerably to get Jimmy Graham from the Packers, even though he really didn't do much for them. And beyond him, they really don't have anyone impressive or noteworthy. But as per usual with the Chicago Bears, the offense isn't really where it's at. Seriously, what is it with the Bears? Why do they always try to play football like it's 1970? There's always a good defense, usually a pretty good running game, but you guys never ever have a quarterback. The last time you were in the Super Bowl, you had Rex Grossman trying to beat Peyton Manning. How is it that you're the oldest franchise in football, yet your best quarterback ever is Jim McMahon? You know what? In Jim's honor. We are the Bears, shuffling crew, shuffling down and doing it for you. We're so bad, you know we're good. Blowing your mind like we knew we would. Come on, you had to know that was coming, right? The Bears were a top 10 team defensively last year, and that's considering how worthless their offense was. The offseason saw a lot of shuffling around, but don't be fooled. Everyone they brought in to replace old players is pretty similar in skill, if not superior. Granted, it hurts that they lost Nick Williams on the defensive line, but they're hoping to have Akeem Hicks healthy this year. They lost Leonard Floyd, but hey, they got Barkevious Mingo and Robert Quinn. Opposite Kyle Fuller at cornerback, they did lose Prince Amukamara, and even though they have a lot of names vying to replace him, there's not one obvious standout, so that might be something to keep an eye on. But the bottom line is the Bears defense looks like it's going to be nasty yet again, so something for you fantasy players to keep an eye on, especially if Khalil Mack has an up year, considering that the consensus is that he had a down year last time around. So honestly, the Bears' floor and their ceiling is dictated by what Nick Foles can do for them at quarterback. Even though it's easy to think of them as being a lousy team last year, They went 8-8, and their defense is just as good, if not better, this year. If they can have even a decent offense, there's reason to think that they're going to be a really good team, but that's hardly a lock. I honestly don't know what exactly to expect from Foles. I actually don't think he's going to be wonderful or terrible. I think we'll get something in the middle. But to be honest, the Bears' schedule's pretty easy, and anything could really happen with them. I'm going to cop out a little bit and predict that they have yet another 8-8 season. Sorry, Bears fans. Maybe next year's draft will go a little bit better for you. Can't be any weaker than this one was. Yes, I'm aware that those draft picks went to getting Khalil Mack. Alright, the Detroit Lions, who have a coach that seems to think that a pencil in your ear and being mean to the media makes you Bill Belichick. By the way, Matt Patricia, you can't write in pencil on laminated paper, just an FYI. The Lions failed to win 4 games last year, and the lazy and also incorrect narrative, if you weren't really paying attention, was that Matt Stafford got injured about halfway through the year, so therefore they fell apart. The reality is that when Stafford went down, the team was 3-4-1. The team finished 10th in the league in passing overall, so that department clearly wasn't the issue. It seems like they haven't had a proper running game since Barry flippin' Sanders left the team. A lot of people seem to think that drafting DeAndre Swift in the second round can help change that. Kenny Golladay at wide receiver and TJ Hawkinson at tight end lead a pretty good receiving core, but watch the right side of the offensive line this year. They lost Graham Glasgow, who had been their rock at that position, and it seems like they're expecting a third-round pick to take up the reins for him. Also, they overpaid to get Vaitai from the Eagles at right tackle. Vaitai was pretty good as the top backup O-lineman on the Eagles. You could certainly get by with him for a while, and they did, but you don't really want him as a starter, especially not for what they're paying him. Now, the big issue was that the Lions were dead last in the league in pass defense. How do you have Darius Slay at cornerback and still end up last in the league in pass defense? See, that's why it's so frustrating to talk about the Detroit Lions as a franchise. They could have Calvin Johnson at wide receiver, Barry Sanders at running back. Hell, give them Joe Montana at quarterback. Put Mean Joe Green and Aaron Donald on the defensive line and Reggie White. Give them Lawrence Taylor, Ed Reed at safety. Still, somehow, they'd find a way to go 9-7. But I digress. Darius Slay's an Eagle now, and in his place, they drafted the top corner of the draft with the 3rd overall pick. They got Harmon at safety, Desmond Trufant at cornerback. So they definitely stepped up their secondary in the personnel department. In fact, if you were looking at their defensive personnel on the whole, you might expect this defense to be pretty good if they had a good coach. Personally, I was surprised that Patricia made it back this year at all, and I do not think that he's a good coach. A lot of these players they scooped up in the offseason to shore up the defense are former Patriots players. History has shown that scooping up mostly unknown guys who were only good on the Patriots is not a good move for your franchise. So I guess we'll find out if the Lions defense was an issue of not having the right people or if there was something schematically wrong with the team. The Lions do have some potential this year, and I've heard quite a few people buzzing that they're either going to do well or in some cases even win the division. At the same time, I've heard a bunch of people say the exact opposite, and I fall closer to that end of the spectrum. I don't think it's fair to write off the 2020 Lions as a future crappy team and then just call it a day, but that also doesn't mean that I think they're going to be a good team. I think they're going to be competitive in most games, and maybe early on they might even trick you into thinking that they're going somewhere. But at the end of the day, no matter how they get there, I've got the Lions going 6-10, and then the Bill Belichick wannabe at coach is out the door with his laminated piece of paper and pencil in tow. The Green Bay Packers, who actually haven't done a whole lot during this offseason, although you'd never know it considering that every time Aaron Rodgers turns around, somebody's taking a shot at him in the media. And in other NFL news today, we've got an anonymous but reliable source who tells us that apparently sometimes when Aaron Rodgers goes grocery shopping, he doesn't always smile when he says hello to the cashiers. We'll have Jordy Nelson on in the next hour to confirm or deny the accusation. We gotta get some better stories in here. Packers went 13-3 last year, making it to the conference finals, but that's a little misleading. If they weren't the worst 13-3 team ever, they had to be close to it. Admittedly, they completely had the numbers of their division rivals, including the pretty good Minnesota Vikings. Other than that, and a Kansas City Chiefs team that didn't have Patrick Mahomes at the time, every team they beat was 8-8 or worse. They got absolutely humiliated by the excellent 49ers. And we learned that their defense is speedy, but not nearly strong enough to deal with a power running team that can ram it down your throat. Their offense was okay, not great, not terrible. Their star players, of course, being Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, Aaron Jones at running back, and Devontae Adams at wide receiver. Once you get past that, there's really nobody other than their offensive linemen, of course. So logic would indicate that they would have gone for either a really good pass-catching tight end or another wide receiver in the first round of the draft. Logic would be wrong, as they went for Jordan Love at quarterback in the first round, and then got a backup running back in the second. Honestly, I have no idea what Aaron Rodgers has to do to get a wide receiver or a tight end drafted for him in the first round. Brian, please draft me someone in the first round who can catch the football. I'll do anything. I'll throw the ball to someone other than Adams. I won't throw it away on third down anymore. Please, I'll do anything.
No.
Ugh. So, while losing Jimmy Graham, who himself had been a total disappointment for the Packers, they now have nobody at tight end. Absolutely nobody. They did pick up Devin Funchess on the cheap as a number 2 wide receiver, which isn't a bad pickup, although I seriously doubt that's exactly what Aaron Rodgers and everybody else had in mind for giving him some weapons. Seriously, the guy they drafted in the 3rd round, supposedly more of an H-back, blocking tight end rather than a pass-catching one. Defensively, they lost a few really good linebackers, including Blake Martinez. They picked up Christian Kirksey to replace him. We could debate if that's an even exchange or not. Not sure about that. But that's about it. Otherwise, the team looks exactly the same. They downgraded at right tackle a little bit, losing Bulaga. And to be fair, it's a little early to make any grand judgments about Matt LaFleur's coaching abilities, considering it was his first year, and by hook or crook, he did go 13-3. Still, aside from the personnel matchup issues against the 49ers, the fact still remains that Matt LaFleur got outcoached 6 ways from Sunday by Kyle Shanahan. One thing the Packers do have working in their favor is that it seems like the Lions, Bears, and the Vikings can't seem to stop the Packers under any circumstance. So they probably will win all 6 division games again. But if the Packers were a largely pretty good team that just couldn't stop power running teams last year, well, they're that again, but maybe a little bit worse. Honestly, unless Matt LaFleur has some huge leap in coaching prowess, I don't really see any way you can argue that the Packers are significantly better or even better at all this year than last. That doesn't make them terrible by any stretch, but I actually have the Packers at 9-7 this year. Still, if my theory holds true about them beating up all their division rivals, though, that 9-7 will be just enough for them to win the division, which means they'll be the number 4 seed, and I see them making a hasty departure in the first round of the playoffs. Lastly, the Minnesota Vikings. There's nothing big going on in Minnesota now, right? Now, the Vikings actually had a lot they had to take care of this offseason, as they lost pretty much their entire core of cornerbacks. Even though they did have a top 10 scoring defense, considering how many guys they would have had to pay a lot of money, it was almost certainly worthwhile to let a lot of names go, especially among the corners whose play had declined, Xavier Rhodes being the prime example. The Vikings did do a decent, I wouldn't say spectacular, but decent job of replacing those names. Stephon Diggs, who is now a Buffalo Bill, will be replaced by Justin Jefferson, a first-round draft pick. They drafted high at cornerback this year, and the fact that they've got Smith and Harris at safety should help smooth that transition. But regardless of how good their rosters looked the last couple years, they've been somewhat limited by their quarterback, Kirk Cousins, pictured here. Kirk Cousins might be the whitest guy in the NFL, and that's saying a lot for quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins is so white he gets a sunburn from the TV. Kirk Cousins is so white you turn the lights off and you can still see him. Kirk Cousins is so white when he stands outside in the winter he disappears. Kirk Cousins is so white he thought Malcolm X was a porno. In all seriousness, the extension that they gave Kirk Cousins was a little bit confusing, as he's not an atrocious quarterback, but he's definitely not a great one. The offensive strategy for the Vikings has pretty much just been give the ball to Dalvin Cook as many plays as you can, and every once in a while ask Kirk Cousins to make a big pass. It's worth noting that as of this recording, Dalvin Cook is actually holding out for a better contract, which I don't think he's all that likely to get. But the entire formula for beating the Vikings, as the 49ers showed in the playoffs last year, is to just shut down Dalvin Cook and make it so that Kirk Cousins has to drop back and pass every play. He can't do it. If there was any justice in the football world, Kirk Cousins would be giving Dalvin Cook some of his salary. Hey, Dalvin, buddy. It's Kirk. How's it going? Hey, how do you want me to get that money to you? PayPal? I got Venmo. You know what? I'm being silly. Why don't I just drive it over to you and give it to you in cash? You want me to pick you up anything to eat along the way? In the playoffs last year, the Vikings did sort of shock the world by beating the New Orleans Saints in the first round. Some people would give you the narrative that because they did that, that means that, oh look, Kirk Cousins actually can win a big game. Look, he can take them far into the playoffs. But honestly, that felt like a minor miracle. That game showed the one and only way that a game can go for the Vikings to win over a good team. And as you saw in the next round, that's not going to happen playoff game after playoff game after playoff game. You'd never know that the Vikings have been a historically really good franchise. The Vikings don't have really bad stretches for that long. You'd never know that they've been to 4 different Super Bowls. They're constantly in the NFC Championship. In fact, they've had many really good seasons that just came to an abrupt and screeching halt in either the NFC Championship or 4 different times in the Super Bowl. In fact, the next time the Vikings make an NFC Championship, just tell them it's a regular season game. That way they'll play up to their potential because they collapse late in the playoffs. Every other franchise that's as consistently good as the Minnesota Vikings are have at least one Super Bowl win to show for it. In most cases, even more than that. I don't know why the Vikings have historically been such choke artists in the playoffs. In any case, you won't have to worry about that this year. The Vikings will arguably be the weakest team in the playoffs. Similar to the Packers last year, the Vikings got by on picking on weak teams. I see little reason to think that won't happen again this year, but they gotta prove to me that they can beat the Packers. To me, this year's Vikings team screams 9-7. And because they can't beat the Packers, they'll lose the tiebreaker and take a wild card spot. But I don't see them going past the first round of the playoffs. Alright, so that's how I see the NFC North going this year. I've got the Packers just barely eking it out at 9-7. The Vikings also going to the playoffs by tying with the Packers, but losing the tiebreaker. And I got the Bears at 8-8, although I think that could change by a few games depending on how their quarterback situation plays out. And of course, the Lions at 6-10. What say you? Am I assuming too much mediocrity from the division? Is this the year that the Lions surprise people? Does Nick Foles light up the Bears' offense? Does Matt LaFleur take some kind of second-year coaching leap? Does Kirk Cousins finally put it all together and take the Vikings to the promised land? So be sure to let me know in the comment section, like my video, subscribe to my channel. Next week, we'll be doing the NFC South. There weren't any big offseason moves in that division, right? Enigma out.